So, let's talk about Australia's massive submarine deal. Is it a stroke of strategic genius, or is it a monumental mistake? Well, that's exactly the provocative question at the heart of a paper by Rochelle Forrester, and today we're going to dive deep into her analysis.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this whole debate, you've got to start with the price tag. And, it is staggering, to say the least.
368 billion Australian dollars. Yep, that's not a typo. That's the potential cost for this program over the next 30 years. Let that sink in for a second. We're talking about one of the single biggest, most complex defense investments in modern history.
So, what's Australia getting for all that cash? Well, it's for 8 of the most advanced submarines ever built. Now, they're nuclear-powered, which is a huge deal. It gives them incredible range and endurance. But, and this is the crucial detail, the one Forrester's entire argument really hinges on, they will be conventionally armed, so no nuclear weapons.
And this is where the paper really shifts gears, moving past the sticker shock and asking a much more fundamental question. What if this cutting-edge technology, this massive investment, is already on the brink of being obsolete?
That right there is the author's really stark conclusion. The paper argues that far from being the stealthy, invisible hunters of the deep, these future submarines could actually become highly vulnerable targets, underwater sitting ducks. Wow, that's a powerful claim to make.
Which, of course, brings up the obvious question, right? How on earth could a vessel designed for ultimate stealth, costing billions of dollars, suddenly be so easy to find? Well, according to this paper, the answer has less to do with the submarine and more to do with a fundamental shift in detection technology.
The paper's answer revolves around this concept it calls the transparent ocean. The core idea is that the vastness of the ocean is just no longer a guaranteed hiding place. And the crazy part? The technology driving this change isn't some massive superweapon. Nope. It's something remarkably small and cheap.
Meet the sonobuoy. You can basically think of it as a disposable listening post for the ocean. They're just these small tubes dropped from planes or ships that use sonar to either listen for submarines or to actively ping for them under the surface.
The strategy, as the paper lays it out, is brilliantly simple. You just seed a huge area of the ocean with thousands of these cheap, disposable sensors. They create a massive network, listening or pinging away. The moment one of them detects a sub, its location is immediately relayed to an aircraft. And a submarine, for all its power, is a tortoise compared to the hair of a modern anti-sub plane. It's a classic case of a cheap, distributed network overwhelming a single, very expensive asset.
And this really gets to the economic heart of the argument. You've got a multi-billion-dollar submarine on one side of the scale, and on the other, you have a $1,000 sensor that the paper argues can find it. This is a perfect example of what military strategists call asymmetric warfare.
And look, this isn't just Forrester's theory. The paper actually cites a report from the National Security College at the Australian National University, which predicts the oceans will likely become transparent by the 2050s. Now here's the real kicker. The 2050s is right around the time these AUKUS submarines are supposed to be fully entering service. The timing is pretty concerning.
So if submarines are a bad bet, what's the alternative? Well, the paper doesn't just criticize. It proposes a radically different vision for how Australia could spend this money to build a more effective and more modern fighting force.
The paper's proposed alternative? Drones. Forget the submarines, it says. Invest in swarms of advanced aerial drones, like the Reaper. The contrast is just stark. One is massively expensive, it's slow, and it puts a large crew in harm's way. The other is cheap, fast, agile, and has zero crew risk.
Let's just look at the numbers here, because this is pretty wild. For the cost of 8 of those submarines, the paper calculates that Australia could buy over 6,000 Reaper drones. Now, of course, the paper acknowledges that Australia doesn't need nearly that many, but it makes the point that even buying a few hundred would be a huge boost to its capabilities, while leaving hundreds of billions of dollars on the table for other defense needs.
The author summarizes this whole point with a really powerful metaphor. The submarines are golden mice. Think about it. They're incredibly expensive to build and operate, but because they only carry conventional weapons, the paper argues they just don't pose enough of a threat to justify the enormous cost.
So, to wrap up the argument, the author places this entire debate into a wider historical context, suggesting this might be a classic example of a very common and very costly military planning mistake.
The paper argues, we've seen this movie before.
In World War I, it was cavalry charges against the machine gun. In World War II, it was the mighty battleship against the aircraft carrier. In both cases, a massive investment was made in a legacy technology that was just about to be rendered obsolete. So, the paper asks, is the submarine the new battleship?
And the paper's final warning is about what it calls tunnel vision. It's the risk that military planners get so focused on just getting the next generation of their current ships, planes, or tanks that they fail to see the truly disruptive technologies that are changing the very nature of war. In other words, they end up preparing to refight the last war, not the next one.
And so we're left with a $368 billion question at the heart of this paper. Is the AUKUS deal a prudent investment in future security, or is it a massive gamble on a technology that's losing its edge? It's a question with no easy answers, but it's one that's absolutely crucial to consider.